Hello, Instagram. How are we today? It is Tuesday, which means it's time for Tuesday Tips Live. And today we are in for a treat. Today we are talking with Dr. Alison Miller. Dr. Alison Miller is the founder of the Dissertation Coach. She's also the founder of the Academic Writers Space. She's amazing. She happens to be a friend and colleague of mine, and she is with us now. Can you imagine? Hold, please. We're going to bring the Dissertation Coach into the conversation here. Dun, 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 dun. Yes, Dissertation. Today, this is part of our personal accountability series. So Alison is going to have some major insights to share with us. Alison!
I made it.
Can you, wait, I'm not hearing you right now. Are you hearing me?
I can hear you. You can't hear me?
You can hear me? Okay, people, this is the interactive part of the program. This is where you get to help us help you. Can you hear me and can you hear Alison? Please comment.
Tell me if, can you hear me?
I'm not hearing Alison.
Melissa, can I? Let's see.
Oh, wait a minute. You know what? This is what I love about myself sometimes. Sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. Mounds, Almond Joy has nuts, Mounds don't. You know what I did? I earlier was talking to a colleague and I had that on. And now it's not on anymore. How you like me now? That was totally user error on my part. So which is kind of perfect because we're talking about personal accountability and meeting ourselves where we are. And we are here.
Can you
Dr.
hear me,
Alison, I can totally hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us today.
I'm so happy to be here.
Excellent. So I'm going to reintroduce you. So because I think that my audio quality before was probably not up to par.
We can cut off that whole part.
I can cut off that whole part, fix it in post. I've heard those words before. So Dr. Alison Miller is the founder of the Dissertation Coach and the Academic Writers Space. She has supported and helped over 9,000 students, researchers, writers finish their manuscripts, finish their books. She is amazing in that regard, but it's really overall about helping people achieve their full potential. And so Alison is really about meeting ourselves where we are and personal accountability. So Alison, welcome. What would you say is the number one ingredient to creating true personal accountability?
Compassion. It's absolutely, to me, it's the foundation of everything. And whatever's happening in your life, whatever challenges you're experiencing, whatever difficulties, breakdowns, the answer is always to start with compassion. It's really about a softening inside of ourselves, of recognizing that being human is very challenging. And we are not in control of ourselves. And we have a lot of cultural programming. There's a lot of like malware in our system that we've taken in from the culture, in our families. All of us have been traumatized in some way in life. And we have wiring that it's like pre-programming that has us operate in ways that we really wouldn't consciously choose to. And so in order to really feel like a sense of personal accountability, to feel like you can have ownership of like, yeah, you know what, I did do that. And those were the results. Or, you know, even if somebody else is behaving in a way that's unkind or not very effective, and we interact with them, we still have to own how we choose to respond to whatever's going on in a relationship or around us. So the only way to really truly be able to feel accountable, though, is you have to be kind, because you'll never really own what's going on if you're judging yourself and being critical.
100%. And yeah, so I see one of the comments is, what's the topic today? The topic is about how self-compassion really is the foundation for personal accountability, which leads to productivity. It leads to results. It's actually, I think, a contrary notion in our society to have self-compassion be the bedrock of results and accountability. I I really think that. And I loved your comment about the trauma and the reactions and using the analogy of malware, because I think about we can all think about, okay, our phone or our laptop or our tablet, it's not running properly. We can't figure out what it is, and it's just running slow. It's not optimized. And typically, it's because there's some type of malware installed, and we don't know it. We can't sense it. We don't even notice it in the air. So, if we're operating with this malware, Alison, how do we even stop to start to untangle it?
Well, I think the first thing is that's really important is to develop a compassionate observer. A lot of times we just want to rush to fix ourselves, to change ourselves. And we're mean to ourselves, like, you got to stop being that way. Why are you always this way? And we get kind of disgusted with ourselves even. But actually what's happening is our programming, the malware is running, right? It's in a lot of times it's very well practiced and it's automatic. Like, for example, one of the things that we do often is we get an email in our inbox and we freak out. Oh my God, I can't deal with this. This is so overwhelming. You can't stop that layer, that malware of like the freak out, but you can observe it. You can, when you're a compassionate observer, you're like, wow, isn't that fascinating? A piece of electronic information came to me and my system went to freak out. That's what I'm talking about. It's noticing how we operate, what we do, all the automatic tendencies, the ways that we listen inaccurately to what's going on and then have a reaction.
Yeah.
Compassionate observing opens you up, and what it does fundamentally is it actually makes you smarter.
Yeah.
Like, this is the secret to growing intellectually and emotionally and psychologically and spiritually, is to be this compassionate observer where you watch and you begin. Here's a great example. This morning, I had an 8:30 a.m. call with some people on my team. I did not get in the shower until almost 8:10. And so I was in the energy of rush, 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 rush. And then I had this awareness of like, wow, isn't it fascinating how you are rushing? Do you really need to rush? Is there another way of being that's possible? Like, owning the fact that I actually am rushing, it's like personal accountability. My system is rushing. Do I need to do that? I don't have to judge myself. I just notice it. And when you begin to notice, after enough noticing for a while, there starts to become forks in the road that open up where you go, oh, I could actually do something else. So self-compassion really helps us be accountable in a way that opens the door for new ways of relating and behaving and being that weren't possible without the compassionate observing.
I love that. And one of the things that I notice about that is it requires time, which is
Time.
not something that we allow ourselves. And it doesn't require a lot of time. So here's one, like, I feel like that is a little bit of a mind game that happens. We know that it is going to take additional time, and yes, it does. And it doesn't take the time that we think it does, because we think it's going to take a lot of time, so we don't allow it. Wherein, if we just give ourselves that moment. So my example to your email, I love that example because I noticed this last week. There were all of these emails coming into my inbox, and I started to notice, oh my goodness, like I was freaking out over the emails, and I felt overwhelmed by the emails. And then I paused and I reflected on it. And I thought, wow, look at all the people that are involved in this project that are providing support. Like, the emails that are actually coming in are supporting emails, and they are not they're not attacking. There's nothing about an email that is actually attacking us typically.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes there are attacks in email, but typically it's not an attack. And it's interesting, the malware that has us hypersensitized to feel like it's shrapnel coming at us through our laptops
Mm-hmm.
and phones.
It's a great example that you shared, because what happened was, by compassionately observing what was happening, a new door opened for you into, oh, these are actually supportive emails. You were able to pivot and shift and see what was happening through a different lens that wasn't nearly as activating of your nervous system.
Yeah.
Well done.
Well, thank you. It was an example that tied right in with what you're talking about here, and it's interesting. I saw a post. It was an Instagram post recently, and it looked at how there are so many coping mechanisms for trauma that are really well received and supported in our culture. So whether it's perfectionism, people pleasing, these things that pull us off, actually, that are not really that aren't acts of self-compassion, right? That pull us off the self-compassion track, that are really, well regarded in society. So we fall into these sort of pitfalls at the expense of self-compassion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, one of the things that's making it difficult for us to be accountable right now that I just want to mention, this is a term that comes from the Army that I learned recently. I think I might have shared it in the Tiara talk the other day. It's called VUCA. You're going to love this, Melissa.
Oh, I love VUCA.
You know it? Volatility, uncertainty, right? Chaos and ambiguity. So we have to understand it's 2021. We're living in a global pandemic. None of us imagined before, maybe a few researchers and people out there, but the vast majority of humans on this earth had no idea this was coming and that the pandemic was going to be this long. And we're in this place where we don't even know. It's long, it's extended. We don't know what's happening. There is a lot of uncertainty and volatility and all those things in life right now. And to realize is that we don't have control, but we do have the option to choose to say, you know what? I'm going to be deeply compassionate of myself. I know everyone else is living in this context too, but the person that you can do, the person that you are can be compassionate, can say, wow, this is not easy for me, and allow yourself to witness and observe all the ways that it isn't easy for you. See, that's the foundation of personal accountability, because you're really acknowledging the suffering, the struggle, the pain, the difficulty that's present for you. Okay, all right. Well, now what can I do? I'm accountable for who I am in the world and how I treat people and how I behave, but I soothe my nervous system ongoingly. I check in with myself and I acknowledge it's kind of like parts of us get activated that are stressed out and freaking out and worried and responding to the VUCA poorly. And that's where we oftentimes lose contact with being accountable. But when we're like, oh, this is really difficult. I'm experiencing a difficult moment, a difficult series of moments in my life. All right, well, what can I do? I ask myself that question all the time. What are my options? What other doors could I possibly walk through? And I'm owning the fact that I'm triggered, that I'm upset, that I want to do all of my malware triggered behavior. But that doesn't produce the results that I want in my life in any realm when I do that.
Right. It's funny. I feel like I'm quite, I would call it a kind vigilance throughout the day, where I notice I've got the compassionate observer, and it could happen with an email. It's not a one and done. It's not like I wake up in the morning, because I wake up in the morning, I do a short yoga series, I meditate, I do my self-care in the morning to kind of kick off my day. And I used to think that was going to make my day great, right? Like, okay, now I'm going to be great all day long. No, like come 2:00, I might leave my headset on when I go to start an Instagram live. And then what do? Well, then I just laugh at myself and I think, okay, Lucy, or because I'm basically, I know that I'm walking around as Lucille Ball in in a sitcom. And because I know that about myself, I can give myself a little bit of forgiveness around things. But it's not like I ever can fire the voice in my head, the malware in my head. I've never been able to fire them. And I don't think I'm going to fire them. I don't know that I would want to fire them, but I do have to be able to manage that and just, chuckle and move on.
Well, we have to live with them. right? They are a part of us. So it's important to remember that there are parts of us that don't want to be accountable. They're like our young children parts, right? They want to throw tantrums. They want to do things like, well, I'm just being honest. And then we say something really nasty, right? You know, there's parts of us that are young and that, you know, and that can take the reins, can take control of us in any moment, especially if something like our sense of belonging or our safety feels threatened. We can really get triggered into behaving in ways that are not at all aligned with the kind of human being that we want to be in the world. And we're all vulnerable to that. So something that I think is helpful is to remember that one aspect of being personally accountable is recognizing that there are parts of us that need parenting. They need compassionate, loving parenting to say, you know what? Hey, how you just spoke to your partner or your friend or your boss or your coworker, that wasn't kind.
Right.
That wasn't effective. And it's okay. I know you're feeling really triggered. I understand where that came from. Like, what do you need? How can we soothe that? So to me, this is why I'm saying I don't really think you can just be accountable if there isn't some quality of softness inside. Maybe some people can, but for me, that would be impossible. To really be able to own, like if I have an argument with my husband and I think he was behaving really poorly, but I can go back and see how that argument got kicked off. And when I'm really compassionate of myself, I can see the subtle ways in which I actually contributed to how that went downhill, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm not soft with myself about it, then it's all his fault. And I lose my power because I'm not accountable for my role in it. When you're accountable for your role and the things that are going on in your life, whether they're successful or they're terrible, or in between, that you start to tap into power, because now you're like, oh, I had a role in that communication. Now I see I have options, other options than doing what my malware tells me to do.
Oh, 100%. And what I find interesting is right now there are so many triggers out there, and so you get to a point where, okay, or one, not you, Allison, but I'll speak for myself. Like I can manage the triggers. I can manage the triggers, and then and actually, sidebar. Are you a Gabor Mate fan? Do you know about Gabor
Yes,
Mate?
I do.
And okay, so I, love him. Anyhow, but when he talks about triggers, he says, think about the actual mechanism of a trigger, whether it's on a cannon or on a pistol or whatever, wherever there's a trigger. The trigger is a teeny little part, right? And then the rest of that firearm is us. Right. So the little trigger that's out there may or may not have meant to trigger us. And we're holding the whole mechanism for the gun. We're holding the gunpowder, right? And the explosives and all that within us. And to just recognize that, to kind of demystify or uncouple the power of the trigger with the trigger itself and make it as much outside ourselves. But I get to a point where I'm like, okay, I've shown up. Okay, this trigger handled it. This trigger handled it. And then we get worn down, our brakes get worn down a little bit. And so it really, that kindness that you're speaking of, that softness, becomes ever more necessary, because a lot of the triggers, at least the triggers that I'm noticing, they come across as very hard and very strong, and a lot of bullying, perhaps, triggers that are in, whether it's in society or government, what have you. And then that happens. And so it feels like we need to meet that. We need to meet that energy with an equal energy. And it doesn't actually go well. It doesn't work.
Yes, that's a really great point. Well, I think what you're pointing to, something that is really significant in our life, is when we get triggered, we actually are having a physiological reaction. We have thoughts and emotions and intense sensations moving through us. It's kind of like we just ate a really big meal and it needs to be broken down and metabolized. And so one of the reasons what you described so beautifully, Melissa, is we meet this trigger and then another one and we get worn down. And one of the reasons that's the case is because we are so busy. We got so much going on that actually that experience we just had of being triggered, and the physiological arousal doesn't get broken down. It's like it doesn't get digested, and then we go on and we have another meal. So one thing that we can do, and I appreciate that comment, a quality of softness inside, this one hits big. Yes.
Yeah.
You could literally, I think you could walk away from this Instagram live that you're watching with one word to remember, which is soften. Soften. Like when in doubt, softening will almost, 100% of the time help. Oh, I'm having a difficult moment. I'm feeling super triggered. Wow. See, because then we start to be able to step back and be the sky that allows the experience, because it's really a cloud. It's a temporary experience. When we're in it, it can feel like it's going to go on forever. But being able to see, it's kind of hard to describe. It's sort of a new experience I've been just recently tapping into, which is, wow, I'm super triggered, or wow, there's something intense going on. Letting myself really feel it all the way through. It's like, and then I drop through back to myself of like, wow, that was amazing. Isn't it incredible? I'm 51 years old and I can experience something and feel like I'm 4. Wow, stunning. But I'm holding that in like a loving, compassionate way of like, that's just what's true, is that I'm a human being, and the way that I'm configured is I can feel like I'm 4 years old just from a look, a comment, a tone of voice. It's astonishing how we are wired. And when we acknowledge that, well, it's so much easier to be like accountable of like, yeah, accountability to me is not about like, you did that and you're wrong. It's accountability of like, wow, that's what happened. They said this, and then I thought this, and I felt this, and I said this, and off we went. Wow, that's possible. Yep, I can own that's what happened in me, because that's what happens in human beings.
Yeah. And instead of doing the double whammy, the double
Yes.
arrow of, oh, look, you did it again. It's, it's interesting. I've pulled little teeny tiny hacks. That's the only way that I can describe it. Where like when I catch myself, I just recognize that I'm never going to get it right. I will assume I'm never getting it right, which is a help. And then when I start to not get it right in real time, then I catch myself and I say, sweetie. I just add sweetie to it. Because my mom will sometimes call me sweetie. My grandma used to call me sweetie. One of my teachers and mentors used to call me sweetie. And so I can catch myself mid meanness, and then I'm like, oh, sweetie. And there, something that I would want to, acknowledge for people as well. There are moments where I don't feel myself softening, and I can't soften. And I'm in a position where I feel like there's nothing about me that is going to soften right now, and I'm going to cut you. Right. And I'm going to cut you might be external or internal or both. And when I get that way, it's not, soften doesn't help, but if I can help myself to dissolve a little bit. Like there's something about, plop, plop, fizz, fizz, oh, what a relief it is. Like if I can dissolve a little bit, it will soften.
Exactly, because you're softening about not being able to soften.
Right. That's where we
really
get
interesting.
meta.
Exactly. So find your words, right? Dissolve, whatever the words are that just remind you of like, I'm in a temporary moment of intensity, and it creates an optical illusion that this is going to go on forever. And when we're in the intensity, we're extremely vulnerable to the F it moment. You should not say that. You should not do that. You should not hit send on that email. But there's that F it, like screw it, where the intensity of the experience inside of ourselves takes control of us, and we are merely a puppet who is right. But we don't want those young, vulnerable parts of us to take control of us. They're allowed to be included. They really are just needing to be parented and loved and accepted, But because if they're not, they can get very rowdy. That's kind of, in a way, sort of what it's part of the malware, right? Of like,
Yeah.
But I think they really do need to be included and welcomed and like, and lovingly parented. It's, in some ways, personal accountability really is about maturity. It's maturity. It's internal leadership of, I can feel that my system, sometimes I'll say to my husband, you know, my system is not capable of having this conversation right now. I love you. I'm super triggered. Give me a few minutes, because I'm not capable, and it takes every cell in my body, it feels like, to not blow my top. But I know that when I do, it is harmful. You know,
100%.
it's toxic.
So, okay, so here's my question for you. Do you think you were born with sort of a hot temperament?
I think I was born incredibly sensitive, very, very sensitive. And I was born in, and I was made, the way that people in my environment responded to sensitivity was to tell me I was too sensitive, I was dramatic, I was too much, you know, that somehow that the sensitivity was a flaw, you know. And so, yeah, and I also grew up, I don't know if I was hot tempered, but like, it's extremely easy, especially if my sense of belonging or sense of being lovable, if I felt threatened that I wasn't accepted, belonging, or lovable, whew, I could fly into, I mean, I still can. I mean, it's, in a way, personal accountability is getting in touch with really knowing what are your hot buttons. Where are we all have our own unique, vulnerable hot spots. I mean, I think we have a lot in common, but they're not the same between one person from another necessarily. But there are those of us out there who, if we feel like we're not loved, oof, super triggered, right?
Yeah.
For other people, if they feel like they're not in control and not respected, whew, that's a total hot button for them. Knowing where your buttons are and what they are, that's a key part, I think, of personal accountability.
Yeah. Yeah. Because then I notice it sometimes walking the dogs. I'll be walking the dogs and I might pass something. I'm out of my neck of the woods or whatever, and I pass something and it's a triggering thing. And then I let it trigger me for whatever reason. And then I walk on and I'm like, Melissa, that's silly. Like, of course that's going to trigger you. It's good. Like, why would it not trigger you? Of course it's going to trigger you. So why are you going to let it do that and ruin a beautiful evening with a gorgeous full moon and the dogs? Like, why would you ever let that happen? And so, but you just, once again, that's not the primary voice sometimes. Sometimes that primary voice that we are hearing is the louder voice, maybe the more adolescent voice, and it's tuning in to that channel that you can barely tune into. That's like, oh, wait a minute. Nope, that's not actually, that's not actually a thing.
That's a great way to put it. That's like, it's like you know, the channel's there, but you, like back in the days when we used to have to like dial the radio and get that, I know most people, a lot of the young people watching this will have no idea probably what we're talking about, but you had to just get the radio just right, and it was tough, but you can find it. There are parts of you that are mature, that are centered, that have, here's what I'm really trying to say. There's internal guidance, but you cannot contact it in a space of reactivity and judgment. We have to, you were talking earlier about time. It takes, any moment of just observing yourself does not really take that much time, but you're much more effective in relationship to time if you're not just walking around reactive, you know?
Right.
But I do want to make another point about time though, which is that this softening, it's kind of like we're thawing out of patterns that all the protective strategies that we've been overusing in our lives. That thawing out takes time. And when you can learn to honor and respect that your personal evolution, your growth as a human being is going to take time, you'll be less hard on yourself. You realize, oh, you know, every single breakdown and problem and triggering moment, all of that, you could just decide, I'm going to choose to believe that's here to teach me. You know, I think I learned from Tara Brach this expression. I don't think it was hers originally, but it was in a text she wrote. May all experiences awaken heart and mind.
I love that. Yeah.
It's a stance to have towards life. You know, I just started a new business called the Academic Writer Space, and I have a really large social media following. So I've been really eager to put the word out about the business. And we're using some software where we're like on the cutting edge of what this business does, of like being a completely virtual business. And so we have clients all over the place. So long story short, the time zone converter they launched in April, has a flaw in it with the central time zone. And I have been on them, sometimes in a more triggered state than is wise, to resolve this. And it's still not resolved. And I have been annoyed and irritable about it and not my best self. And I realized that when I look at it through the lens of may all experiences awaken heart and mind, you know, there's so many lessons for me about how to interact with people, about, you know, getting something that I want that's not happening fast enough. What version of me do I want to show up? And being accountable for the fact that the truth is, first of all, if you're out there in wellness living, I apologize. I probably was a little intense with some of you on the phone. But also, like, the other thing is, one of the awakenings I've had is that, and this is made up, but I'm choosing to believe it because it feels really good to me, is that the reason the time zone converter isn't working, and I'm in this one little thing where I don't want to launch it with that flaw over social media, is because this is helping me build the community at a pace that serves the community. So I'm choosing, and now I'm realizing I'm not going to just put it all over social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, without really thoughtfully grow the community person by person in a thoughtful way, rather than just unleashing it. So I am so grateful to the engineers that didn't realize that the central time zone thing wasn't working and that it's still not resolved, because I need it to be reined in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a great perspective to have. And it's that goes back to your comment about forks in the road. There's a fork in the road where you can choose which mindset and which perspective you're going to hold. And it doesn't mean that you're doing it in a Pollyanna optimistic way. I'm not a big fan of, just be optimistic. I think that's a bunch of BS. But I think looking at it as what will serve me right now, like this actually will serve me to hold this perspective, and it will allow things to open up as opposed to close down and shut down. Speaking of close down and shut down, we're getting close to the time where you need to pop off of this Instagram live.
Yes, I have until about five to the hour. So you know.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. Yes. Because one of the things that I was going to say, there are viewers out there listening, and if there are any questions, I am trying to very carefully scroll up the comments here so that I don't, if I'm ever so off, then it pulls up my whole typewriter screen on the phone. So I'm very cautiously looking and deliciously looking through the comments here. If there are any questions that you have for myself or Alison about personal accountability, about self-compassion, about how to soften in order to get better results, in order to just be more fulfilled, please share them in the comments. And additionally, you can also share them in the comments, and both of us will go back and we'll look at the comments, and we are able to reply to you. So if you're watching this Instagram live past the live date, still comment in the feed, share your perspective, share your question, and we will respond to you in the replies. So that is great. Do you have any particular habits that you share with your clients to help support growing a softness mindset?
That's a great question. It's actually connected to the question someone put in the chat about ways we can begin to commit to self-care. I think that one of the most important things of practice is this kind of it's a noticing the version of you that showed up. Like, here you are in the present moment. What version of you is here? Like, what version? Oh, the capacity to scan and witness it's actually a great act of self-care. It's like all of a sudden, like a really loving parent is showing up and assessing the situation that the child is in and figuring out what to do. Because so often, I say this all the time in the academic writer space, the version of you that shows up to work like to do and to get things done is usually not the version of you imagined when you made your work plan. Almost never, right? So I think that kind of scanning and noticing what version of you is here, you know. Another key thing that I want, and this will, I think, address the question in the chat. So a lot of us want to engage in more self-care, and what we're doing is we're relying on our motivation. It doesn't work. So I am committed to drinking lemon water in the morning, but I don't feel like having lemon water when I get up in the morning. The night before, it seemed like a great idea, but it's like, ugh, I gotta get the lemon and cut it. So now what I do, and this is a key part of being able to have a committed practice of self-care, is you need to create an environment that is aligned with you behaving that way. So this is also connected to personal accountability. It's like, I'm accountable. I am accountable for taking care of this being who is in a stage of life where she is working her butt off, right? I am accountable for making sure that I am well. So every night, I have this little environmental alignment routine where I lay out my exercise mat, my ankle weights, they're right here. I lay out my stuff and I have a moment of like, what workout am I doing tomorrow? Because I do I do some online workouts. I go in the kitchen, I get out the lemon, the knife, the cutting board, the glass, and the little juicer that I use. It's all laying there. So what I've done is I've pre-populated my future environment with the behavior that I want to engage in. I've already begun the behavior. I go into the bathroom and I pick out what am I going to wear tomorrow. I hang the towels over the edge of the shower. I lay out like the makeup I think I'm going to wear, right? And I look at my plan for the next day and I imagine myself moving through the day and what boundaries I need to have, that if I set aside this time to work on this, that's what I'm working on. And I'm going to have to tolerate the burning fires in my life of all the emails that I'm going to get to later, but I committed to doing this.
Yeah.
And then I think it's important in your day to think about having an environment that's aligned with recovery, with care, with recharging. So we opt to take, by the way, Melissa, let's do a Instagram live about this. Because first of all, I want to do Instagram live with you every week now because it's so fun.
I know, it just gives us a chance to hang out.
It's just so fun, right? But we need environments that are optimized for resting and recharging. And most of us aren't attentive to that. We're relying on our motivation to meditate, to do yoga, but we want to have an environment that's like already set up. We've already started the behavior. And we also want to have an environment so that when we go to work, that we can get into the work. It's not clogged up with papers and distractions and sights and sounds. And one last thing I'd say about personal accountability is we need to be accountable for the fact that we're addicted to our phones. Like me, addicted. I can open Instagram without even realize. I don't remember choosing to open Instagram. I'm just in Instagram. It's actually extraordinary. Here we are on Instagram, but I'm just saying we have to understand our phones were designed to captivate us, and they are interfere. I believe most of the people on the planet that have like an iPhone or an Android phone, we are captivated by our phones, and we're actually losing contact with life because of them.
Agreed. Agreed. Driving here, I saw a woman walking her German Shepherd, and she was on her phone, and the German Shepherd wanted to cross the street, and she was still on her phone, and the German Shepherd was looking back at her with such longing. It brought tears to my eyes.
Yeah.
I mean, we're both dog people, so
yes, exactly. No, I would say this. I think a lot of us need to have the courage to have some technology fasts. Ooh, let's do an Instagram live on that.
We can do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
We're going to have to do all these multiple Instagram lives because we're at 5 to the hour, and I am acknowledging and honoring your time so that you can get back to your next thing. I so appreciate the time with you. All of our listeners, whether you are listening live right now or whether you're listening in the future, I love that we're talking to the future right now. We are talking to the future. Leave us your comments. Thank you so much, Dr. Alison Miller, for being fabulous. I love and adore you, and I look forward to future Instagram lives with you.
Oh, so fun. Such a pleasure to have time with you. And thank you all of you who showed up and hung out and listened to us jabber on. I really appreciate it. Hello from Switzerland. Nice to meet you.
Well, have a great rest of your afternoon, Alison.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Melissa.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Dun, 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 dun. And this is where I take a second and say thank you for joining in. Thanks again to Dr. Alison Miller. Thank you all. Remember, softness, dissolve, pause. It really does make a huge impact on the results that you have every day. And thank you. Bye-bye.